Welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast. This is where we take time to talk about various issues that impact our culture, community, and church. My name is Matt. I'm executive pastor here at Ridgecrest Baptist Church, and here's our senior pastor, Michael Estes. Great to have you.
Good to be here today. How are you today?
Very well. Very well.
I got a new coffee mug today. This one I recently got. It was actually a carryover from our previous pastor. He left these with our secretary Vicky, and she pulled them out one day and was like, "Do you want these?" And I was like, "These are beautiful. Yeah, I absolutely do want these." And I like these because when I have fancy guests, these are the kind of coffee mugs I would pull out, and we would drink fancy tea or just black coffee out of these and feel fancy. Yeah, I mean, don't they look fancy?
They look very fancy.
I believe that they're from one of our missions partners in Indonesia. Okay. And that's the reason that they look so beautiful. That missions
unique
partner.
Shape, lots of color, that's not bad.
I feel not only fancy but also like I'm appreciating something that's beautiful as I drink this coffee.
Yeah, that's right.
So I kind of want my life to be like that.
Yeah, you got to raise the pinky though.
There's danger in that with hot coffee. I don't want to get too fancy. I want to be connected to the people. I want to make sure that I don't get my feet off the ground too much, my head too large. Yeah, it's already a big head to begin with. Yeah, it just happens. Naturally, biologically, I have a large head. So
I get it. We as Cloyds have big heads as well. So it's one of those things you learn to live with, right?
That's right. Hats don't fit right. Yeah, I always had a hard time. I always wanted fitted hats as I was growing up. It was kind of a thing back in the early to mid 90s. Yeah. Like fitted hats became like a really big deal, especially baseball teams and stuff like that started wearing them. And I could never find. I was always in between sizes. And it was really frustrating because I didn't want a hat that was like flopping around on my head, but I also didn't want it so tight that like I couldn't feel the top of my head. Yeah. So
that's where I started learning to grow my hair out. Because then I can go size up and then grow the hair out so it fits, a little bit better. And
I was talking to somebody today. They were asking what happens when your hair grows out, and my hair does not grow like yours. It doesn't not flowing locks. It is just giant. It just goes poof, just fluffs out, and it's not a good look for me. Yeah.
And that's,
people would make the statement that no look is a good look for me, but that's okay.
Well, I've heard that as well. So, but yeah, and I'm one where I'll let my hair grow out, and then eventually it'll get to the point where I'm tired of it, I'm too hot, whatever, and then I'll just cut it all off. And
how close are you to that right now? Since it's 120 degrees outside.
Yeah, it's warm. I'm close. What's interesting though is typically I would have already done it. Yep. But I was. With the hat thing, whenever I wear a hat, I had hopes to go to Omaha and, wear a baseball cap while I was up there. I was
hoping we would avoid that topic today.
Yeah, I know. But, I was planning, to do that, and I didn't want to cut my hair before then because I like, when I'm wearing the hat, I like the hair kind of flowing out, it's kind of deal. And so I was like, well, I'll wait till after that. Well, then when Tennessee got eliminated, I had already made it past the point that I typically am where it's really annoying. It's too long to be comfortable, but too short to really fix. And, so it was, but I made it through that phase while I was still watching baseball. So now I've kind of made it over the hump. I was talking to somebody about that this weekend. And so I don't know how long I'll be able to, but it's hot.
I can believe it.
And so that's the very possible thing. I usually end up getting one haircut a year. So if I do it now, then, I'll be about this point again next year. Yeah. So, I think it's been just a little over a year since I've had a haircut. Haircuts are expensive.
Yeah. Depends on what your hair looks like. Yeah. We have several staff members that cut their own hair.
Yeah. Yeah. That's impressive.
So I won't comment on who it is and how easy it might be.
Maybe we can make it a game and say you tell us which staff members cut their own hair.
If you listen to this podcast, if you've made it this far through our hair talk, you can come to us and start guessing who cuts their hair, and I'll tell you if you're right or not, hot or cold.
Yeah, I have no idea how we got here, but this is where we have landed, and
Now we got to
talk about segues. I don't have one.
There's not one.
There's not one for this one. So
a lot has happened since the last time we talked.
A lot has happened since the last time.
But that's pretty normal right now. Like,
it is.
Every single time we turn around, there's a new hot button topic that we can talk about.
There is. And to be honest, I can't even remember, and it's only been, a couple weeks, but I can't remember what topic we talked on the last time.
It was good, whatever it was.
Yeah. I mean, it was fantastic.
Yeah, we talked about social media. That's exactly what we talked about.
Did we? See, I don't even remember that conversation.
We talked about news. We talked about watching the news.
That's right. Screen time and all. Trying to figure out,
Since then,
how
I've gotten a really good book that I'm really looking forward to. That's about a theological approach to reading the news.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to diving into that. Maybe we can revisit it as I read that book and share some new thoughts on that. But I got good feedback from several people that were appreciated. It's good for us to, as believers, think about how we read the news. And,
sure.
And we have a huge news issue topic that we as believers should be thinking about.
That's right.
Beginning to understand how we can engage our culture.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's kind of a perfect segue, because as we think through that, and we spent a lot of time talking about how to evaluate news, how it affects us. We talked about the anger side of it, and you have polarizing topics.
Yeah.
Just in the past week of recording this podcast, the Supreme Court came out with some pretty big news that they were overturning Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
Which is a huge news topic, and depending on which platform you're receiving that news, it could make you very angry. It could make you very excited. It could make you confused. There are a lot of emotions that our culture and community, and even our church, is dealing with surrounding this. And while
I would make the statement that if the church isn't dealing with this, it is foregoing its place as an institution that shapes and changes culture.
That's right. Incredibly important topic. And as you shared a little bit from the pulpit on this past Sunday, and you shared in previous sermons the idea of being for life. The political term is pro-life, pro-choice. It's really, for us,
I think we should use different terminology.
That's right.
Because it's been so politicized, I think we have to use terminology that is more theological.
Yes.
So I think it's wise for us to talk about the sanctity or sacredness of life, as opposed to just I am pro-life. I believe that life is sacred.
Yes.
That is special.
That's right.
So I think that's probably wiser language for us to use.
Yeah, that's really good. And even up to this point, each year in January we have a Sanctity of Human Life Sunday where we talk about that, and I think it is very important. And given this very significant event, I think it's important for us as believers to figure out how do we respond to that. And you're going to be sharing a sermon series in the coming weeks that dives into that a little bit more. But since we have a podcast, great opportunity for us to kind of talk through some of that. And this is another one of those issues that it's a lot bigger than just overturning a court case. And so I think we have to be very careful. And I'll be the first to say I'm not an expert in this field at all.
Same.
There's different women and individuals that I've spoken to who have been impacted by that, and not necessarily abortion, but some of the things that were included in abortion that could negatively affect some people. And so I figure we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But there's just a lot to it, and a lot to figuring out how do we fit. We can Tennessee Baptist Mission Board, they came out last week and wrote an article, kind of a statement. It was really good because it kind of approached this as this is a great thing, but it's not a time just to kind of sit back and celebrate what's going on. This is a time that really our mission field just got a whole lot bigger, and we've got to be intentional in how we reach these young women, these newborn babies. There's just so much to it. So that's kind of where our conversation is going to go. And we'll spend some time talking through this and walk through one of the articles that you found, and we kind of read through. It's How to Greet the End of Roe. It is a really good article. We'll talk through some of that. Talking about fear a little bit. As you read and as you see some of the different posts on social medias, a lot of the concern is some of the fear, like, well, now that this has been overturned, how will this affect this, and then, and so that's kind of where our conversation is going to go. Anything you would add to any of that, as we kind of jump in?
I was thinking about what you said about response, like what is the church's response going to be? And I think like that, there's a couple things I want to say about the idea of response. One, response is very reactive. I think it would be, and this is now we're after the fact, so all of it's going to be reaction. But like, it's better if people already knew what we thought about these things, as opposed to here's our reaction to this thing that's happened, and then it comes across as maybe not well thought out, not carefully and in a nuanced way articulated. I would say that response, though, as we think about response, needs to happen on two levels. It's kind of like a meta level response, and then a more personal, practical level response. Yeah. And the meta level response of the church ought to be one of gratitude, thankfulness that we're entering a new era of reproductive rights and understanding what life is and how we value life. We also need to have a realistic understanding of what's happened on a meta level, because abortion hasn't ended with this court case. In fact, now the thing that a lot of people wanted in the first place is the fact that the federal government no longer oversees this particular issue. It's a state level issue, which means that like there are going to be loopholes in the system. So just because maybe in the state of Mississippi you have laws in place that make it almost impossible to get an abortion, that doesn't mean that somebody can't get in a car and drive over to, pick your state, drive to Illinois, drive up the interstate 8 to 10 hours and get an abortion there. And so like there needs to be an understanding on our part that just because this has happened doesn't mean all of a sudden like everybody values life. There's still work on our end to help people to understand why life matters, why there are better alternatives than abortion as we value life. And so there's a lot to think about on that level. Then there's the personal level that like we're dealing with real people. Yeah. There are people that legitimately have major concerns about the fact that this court case was overturned, and it's easy for us to be dismissive of them and be like, you just don't understand our position. It's our job as believers to be winsome and clear in our position so that people understand why life should matter. Yeah. Why we should seek to keep babies in situations that they have come about where you didn't really want pregnancy. I think we've got to do a better job of teaching young men to be responsible. I think we've got to do a better job of holding legislatures accountable to protect and help and support young mothers, single mothers, children in those situations. Because in reality, a lot of states have terrible laws in place when it comes to things like child support. And so there's a personal level response where we need to love individuals who are going to disagree with us really, really well. And I think there are ways that we can do that. And one of the articles that we looked at was this article about the fears of our neighbors and like taking them seriously, learning to love our neighbors' fears. And I think it's important. There's one of the lines in the article is that we have been discipled to fear. A disciple is a learner, and we learn a great deal from the stories and emotions of those around us. And much of the media's coverage of this, much of social media's kind of distilling and spreading of this particular information has been very fear-based, on both ends. And so we are a culture that is steeped in fear and suspicion of the other side. And the belief ultimately is that the other side is out to get us. The other side really doesn't have good motives. The other side is the villain, as opposed to we're trying to come together to figure out how to live together in a society and a culture That's not the way we approach things anymore. And so we, as believers, kind of stand in this weird middle place, and we've got to try to figure out how to help people look past fear and into like our deeper motives, and we see them and listen to them carefully with a sense of empathy and love and kindness, while at the same time promoting truth.
Yeah, and I think this creates a very it creates the opportunity for believers and non-believers to come together and work on some things, right? And because I believe that if the church, and we as believers kind of rise to that occasion to see it, to hear those fears, to hear the concerns of individuals who have traditionally been pro-choice politically, I believe, deep down we want some of the same things. And we want to care for these young women and care for these young families, and it gives us that opportunity to start that conversation rather than going into this conversation of, oh well, you can be over there, don't really care what you're afraid about, but it really creates an opportunity to have some real dialogue and actually work towards change. And then through that change, people see the love of Christ and are drawn to his gospel and drawn to that.
Yeah, and I think the key in creating an atmosphere that is secured, it has a sense of security as opposed to a sense of fear. I think the very first step in all of that is listening. Like if you have a friend that is, if you're listening to this and you have a friend and you would be politically on the side of pro-choice, and you have friends that are pro-life, and you have friends that are pro-choice, have you actually talked to them in a way that is you're focused on listening to their concerns and understanding their position, or have you immediately just dismissed them and said, your concerns aren't legitimate, the only concern that matters is the life of the baby? That's not to say that the life of the baby is not super important, but at the same time, we have to understand that there are other human beings involved in this whole situation, that we need to address those concerns. We need to listen carefully to what they are, acknowledge them, and help them through those things. If we really believe that we're on the side of truth and with it, that we ultimately are concerned for the life of not only the child but the mother, the father in these situations, the family members that are going to be affected by this situation, then we need to start by listening to them.
Yeah.
So if you were going to have a conversation with a friend that was pro-choice, what's one of the first questions that you would ask?
I would probably start with that fear question. Is like, what is your greatest fear of this being overturned? Because then that's going to see, are they concerned about this mother who's now not going to have the opportunity to go to college, or maybe they're concerned about this mother who maybe she doesn't even know who the father is, and so can't get child support or anything like that, or maybe she's concerned that they know who the father is, and what are you going to do to hold the father accountable, and some of those things, because each person, I think, no matter who you talk to, they're going to have a different kind of central fear, and I would imagine those fears and those concerns are going to align pretty well with where we are as believers, because
so as you were saying that, one of the things that kind of stood out to me is, if those are some of the things that person's talking about. One of the things that's kind of underneath that they haven't stated out loud is that they're fearful for the child as well. That child's not going to have a nurturing environment. That child's not going to have the support that they need to live a full and flourishing life. And so, like, we as believers care about that too.
Absolutely.
We want that child to have we want that child first and foremost to have a life.
Yep.
And then beyond that, we want them to have a full and flourishing life. We don't want them just to live in a life that's full of struggle and poverty and difficulty and family strife and those sorts. We want them to live a full and flourishing life. And what's interesting about that is, if you have that conversation, there's going to be a realization, hopefully, if you're listening with by the way, there's two ways to listen. There's a way to listen where I am setting you up to ask you a question later or to get you as we have this conversation. And then there's listening with, I am legitimately hearing the things that you're saying to me, and I want to respond, but I also, my response is not the most important thing. It's the fact that you have an opportunity to share with me your concern. And I think it's really important for us as believers to do the second kind of listening, where we're legitimately hearing what people are telling us so that we can care about them. And what we find if we do that is this idea of empathy. Another place in the article that I thought was really good. It was from a book. There's a quote from the book called "I Take My Coffee Black," and the author says this: distance breeds suspicion, but proximity breeds empathy. And with empathy, humanity has a fighting chance. And what he means by that is you have a tendency to be empathetic toward people that you're close to. Another thing that like kind of is a part of this whole conversation is like, who are your friends? Do you live in an echo chamber? Yeah. Like, have you found and by echo chamber, that's a fancy sociological term for you've surrounded yourself with people that are completely like-minded. Like you don't have anybody that would in any way, shape, or form push back against any of your beliefs or any of your thoughts, and would never question those things. In fact, they're gonna spend most of their time saying the same thing that you would say. Yeah. Patting you on the back for saying the same things that they would say. And I think it's important that we have people in our life that push back against us on a regular basis. If you look at the life of Jesus, I mean, he was surrounded by people that push back against the things that he said. He didn't just have a bunch of yes men around him who were like, yeah, we like everything you say, Jesus. There were people that questioned him all the time. And he wasn't afraid of that. He invited that. It meant that there was an opportunity to work toward an understanding as opposed to me just believing that I'm right and not really having good reasons to understand that. Yeah, and I think, of course, I'm on TikTok, that's really the only social media platform that I get on. Sometimes Twitter, just to, see what people are saying. And, there's a lot of times I'll watch videos of individuals who, are on the pro-choice side politically. And, a lot of the things that they're sharing and the concerns they're having, again, I mean, it's like, yeah, I agree with that, And so I think we're closer, than sometimes we think, and sometimes we go into it with that echo chamber kind of mentality of, well, I'm completely right, and I'm not really going to listen to anything you have to say. Yeah. But I think the healthiest thing for our culture is to figure out how to come together and truly look for the best we can for everyone involved in these situations. And it's such a big issue. I mean, there's so many things. I even know, I know some individuals who are very much value the sanctity of life and very much in support of that, but were very fearful of Roe v. Wade being overturned because there's certain procedures that currently, in a lot of states, specifically your red states that are very anti-abortion, there are certain procedures that are classified as an abortion when they're not. Yeah. Certain procedures, if a mother has had a miscarriage, depending on when that falls in that pregnancy, she has to have that procedure. And in red states that go very strong and say we're completely banning abortion, to the point that it criminalizes abortion. That's right. Those types of procedures would now no longer be legal. And a mother who's had a miscarriage now has this child that she's having to carry, and it's a very difficult thing. And a lot of people don't realize that. And that was something that I didn't know until, I walked through that with some friends and some things like that. And it's a terrible thing, and so I think that reveals again additional legislation and things that have to take place, on a state level, which I think now you have the opportunity to have those conversations rather than saying, well, we're strictly pro-life, pro-choice. I mean, as you said earlier, this idea of, we're for the sanctity of human life. So that means we're going to walk through and figure out how do we create the best policy for that, not just a pro-abortion, anti-abortion mentality. Right.
And I think we've got to have those conversations because, again, I know people who are very much sanctity of life, but when they heard that Roe v. Wade was overturned, they immediately were fearful for those women who, again, that shouldn't be classified. I mean, we're talking about two different issues.
Yep. So the problem that I hear you kind of articulating is this thing that we're going to have enough courage as believers to step into, and that's nuance.
Yeah.
Like, law a lot of times is notoriously bad at being nuanced. Because if you nuance something, what happens is you begin to like boil it down, and you become fearful that things have lost their meaning. So when you begin to wander into the area of nuance when it comes to life, and like procedures like a D&C where you have had a miscarriage, and the medical terminology makes that determination that it's an abortion. Like, there's just not care with language there.
That's right.
But we have a staff member here, Tim. He jokes all the time with me that English doesn't matter that much, but it's one of those places where like the language matters deeply.
That's right.
And it's hard to step into nuance because then there are additional steps that we have to walk through to make sure we're understanding what the situation is and that sort of thing. And you don't want to create loopholes with nuance, but you also have to be thoughtful enough to say we need to be able to call these things what they actually are. Yeah. And language needs to be clear.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we like to paint with very broad strokes because it simplifies the boxes that we have to put people in. It simplifies the situations that we find ourselves in. And if you've spent much time living, you understand that life oftentimes is not simple. It is often very complex. Situations are very complex. And we need to understand that language needs to match the complexity of life that we live in. And so the ability to be nuanced as believers and to fight for that nuance in law.
Yeah.
So like one of the places that I think that we probably can step up as believers as a response to all of this is we need to be advocates for things like nuance. We need to be advocates for things like we're going to fight for a better definition of what child support is.
Yeah.
The law in the state of Mississippi is such that if a father is not there, the minimum child support that they're required to pay out, and this is assuming that the father makes minimum wage, is $180 a month. That's not going to buy you diapers and formula for a month. So mom's not going to get any child care out of that.
Not even get you half.
No.
Like if you're saying, well, maybe child support supposed to be 50-50, that's not even going to get you near 50-50.
Yeah. And so you're looking at a law that is obviously antiquated and out of touch with reality, but also like you have the situation where even if we bump it up, can the father even pay that?
Right.
So we're talking about an incredibly complex situation, and it's important that we are willing to step into that complexity and deal with the difficulties of that kind of nuance. If we don't, then in reality, all we've said is we changed the law, and that's all we really need to do in the first place. I don't know about you, but that's not gospel language at all. Like, just changing a law is not really what the gospel is.
That's right.
And so we need to create a system, or I'm trying to think of the best, a community that is so focused on kingdom things that there's a sacrificiality there that is willing to give to the needs of another, to help another in really meaningful ways because we have been given to very generously by God.
Yeah. So what I've kind of heard each of us kind of talk through is, we've got to, first of all, listen so we can begin to understand, identify some of those nuance type things that are there, so that way we can be bold to interact and walk through and discuss some of that stuff. We've got to look at, how can we be involved in legislation or working through things to create the best opportunity for those young families or, regardless of, of their age for that matter.
Yep.
And so, I think, all of those, are really good things. And I think another aspect of that is, we talked a lot about on kind of the individual level, or even maybe us as a church, level a little bit, but I think there are a lot of organizations out there who have already been doing some things to try to support and dissuade women from having an abortion, and coming alongside them in various ways, whether it be financial support, whether it be counseling, whatever. There are some ministries and organizations out there that have been doing that already, and if anything, that their field just got a lot bigger because
absolutely, of
some of the changes that are going to be coming. And so I think that's another level is interacting and getting involved with some of those groups and organizations to work together, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's no need for us to try to create something that already exists somewhere, but we can come alongside and work with them, gain a better understanding of what they do, how they do things, and us jump in and get involved.
Yeah, and the danger, another danger in all of this is it's kind of the opposite of, well, we got the law changed, and that's all we really need to do. Yeah. The opposite of that is to become so concerned about all of the challenges that you try to take on every single one of them yourself. And we talked about that a little bit in staff meeting yesterday, is the need for us to, as individuals and then also as a church, to identify some places where we can do good work without overextending our resources and ourselves to the point that we are ineffective. Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm thinking about, the individual believer that listens to this and they're like, I want to do something. I just don't know what that something is. And I don't want you to be paralyzed to the point that, like, well, there's so many needs that I can't meet any of them. That's where the personal part comes in to me. If you know somebody, a single mom that's going through things that are very difficult, there are ways that you can help that single mom. Mm-hmm. You can reach out and like offer to babysit. You can help them financially. You can help them. There are all kinds of things you can help connect them with a local church. There are lots of things that you as an individual can do to help people that you know. But that gets back to or do you live in a bubble, an echo chamber, or do you actually know real people?
Yeah.
And so, like, it's important that you try to meet real needs without over extending yourself and say, well, I want to help all the moms with now difficult situations. You can't do that as an individual, but you can help somebody.
That's right.
And then we as a church, we can partner with one or two organizations that help support moms or children in these situations. We can start trying to help come up with solutions for adoption. We can start thinking about foster care. We can't do all those things.
That's right.
We need to focus in and find the place where we can do something really well and lean into that. And so I want to encourage people, don't think to yourself, oh my gosh, there's so many needs, I can't meet all of them, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
Your job is not to meet all the needs.
That's right.
Your job is to help where you can.
That's right.
Do what you can.
Yeah. Start where you are.
Yeah.
Do what you can. Use what you have.
That's right.
And not necessarily in that order, but yeah.
Something along those lines.
That's it. And I think that's the best thing you do. It's kind of one of those things. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert in the field by any means.
Right.
I'm not a female. Which affects this very differently as well.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm a follower of Jesus, and I care about the salvation of others and care about life, and I can start there. I can figure out what resources I have. Do I have financial assistance? Do I have counseling abilities? Do I have the ability to adopt or foster? And then whatever I define, whatever it is, those skill sets or abilities that I have, jump in and do it.
That's right.
I think that's where we've got to be. And again, this is not something that is just going to be a solution, immediately or anything like that. This is a long game. This is a very, very long game, and I think we as the church have to play it as such. Mm-hmm. And so we can figure out, where we as individuals can start where we are, use what we have, do what we can. but then where we as a church can do the very same thing. And so, I think it's, it is an exciting time to walk through some of these things, but it's also a very serious time where we really need to be paying attention, be listening, and, figuring out how we can do things. I'm excited. We actually are going to have a special guest join us for the podcast. She's actually the executive director for Center of Pregnancy Choices here in the Jackson metro area. Her name is Erin Kate Good, and so she's agreed to come in and join us. And so we're gonna, sit down with her and talk through some of the stuff, talk about their organization and what they've been doing, maybe how the organization will change, or what are some different challenges that they might face or have faced or whatever, and just sit down and have a conversation with her. So I'm excited to have her in. And again, a little bit more of an expert in the field than we are. So excited about that, but as always, as you've listened, if there's, some things, that you've heard and want to discuss further, we're here for that conversation. If you have ideas and you're kind of bouncing through some different things, whether to get involved on an individual level or even on a church level, we'd love to hear those. Right now we are in that, pray and seek God and just seek that direction and figure out where we can go, what we can do to help. And we want to do that. And so if you have any ideas or want to continue this conversation, as always, reach out to us. But we appreciate you join us and just hang around for a bit, and we're going to have an interview coming up. Welcome back to the Ridgecrest podcast, and we're back with a very special interview. We have Erin Kate Good, who is the executive director for Center for Pregnancy Choices here in the Jackson metro area. So first of all, thank you for joining us and being a part of our podcast. And so I guess just to kind of get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became the executive director, how long you've been in that role, and kind of what that role looks like there.
Sure. Thank y'all for having me today. This is an important time for us to have this conversation as a church, so I appreciate y'all taking time to do this. I became the director, kind of started out actually as a volunteer, so backtracks a little bit. I was working in the corporate world. I was actually in the chicken business, has nothing to do with pregnancy, and started to think that I was being called to do something different. And so I reached out to a board member at the CPC. I didn't realize she was on the board, but I said I need something else to do with my time and my talents. And so she pointed me to the CPC, and I started driving over. We had an office in Pearl at that time, and the plant that I worked at was in Flowood, and so I would drive over during my lunch break and do some data entry a couple times a week. And then a position came open as an administrative assistant, and so I just dove in and took that as a part-time job. Went from my full-time corporate job to part-time secretary, and so I did that, and then in 2017 the executive director retired and I became the director, so I've been the director for 5 years now. Okay.
Very neat. And tell me, of course, as we've started, of course we've had this conversation in the past several years as a church, and but now given the recent changes, it looks different, and so I guess tell us a little bit about what CPC kind of looked like before this, and like just some of the things that you guys have been doing in the past several years, and of course you've been in that role since 2017. So what are some of the things that you guys have been doing in this area and working with these young women?
Sure. The CPC is here to address the reason that women consider abortion. So we aren't political. We aren't involved in actually restricting access to abortion. That's for the courts and legislature and all that. But we are mainly there to meet the needs of women, to be there for women who are facing unplanned pregnancy and don't know what to do. A lot of women think that abortion is their only option, and we want women to know they have other options and that there's resources and there's support available. So we're really the connection point between the community of support, the pro-life community, the church, and all the abundant resources that are out there that a lot of women don't know about. And so what we do, we have a lot of effort just going out into outreach for women, because the abortion industry pumps a lot of money into advertising because they profit from abortion, and so it's business for them, of course. And so we compete directly online with abortion clinics to reach women. So that's a big part of what we do that people don't realize, that we're advertising, we're competing with abortion clinics just to get our names out there. Because actually, people don't look up Crisis Pregnancy Center. They don't call. They don't look for that. They're looking for abortion. So we have to be there. So actually, we're getting the pro-life community. We're getting those resources out front and center in front of women. But beyond that, then we see what's causing them to consider abortion. What's going on in their life that would make them be afraid or fearful that they couldn't parent the child, or that maybe they don't know about adoption, as how to place a child for adoption. And so we're looking at the whole woman to see what's causing her to consider abortion, and then we try to fill in the gaps for her. So we have a medical clinic where we do free pregnancy tests and sonograms, and that's important. She needs to know that she's got a viable pregnancy. She could have a positive pregnancy test and not a viable pregnancy, and then so all this fear is really for nothing if it's not viable. She needs to know how far along she is. That determines what kind of abortion she's going to have if she's considering abortion, so that we can, and that's an opportunity for us to talk about the development of the child, and so she can see at what stage that child is, and she needs to know that. She needs to know the science, the facts about where that child is in development, and because a lot of women don't know, and it's not a clump of cells, it's more than that. And so she needs to know that at this stage the baby has a heartbeat or fingers or DNA, things like that. So she's able to see that. And then also to make sure that it's not an ectopic pregnancy, so that the baby's in the uterus. That's very important for her. That's life-threatening if it's ectopic. So those are things we can just rule out on the medical side for her. But then also we're just walking through that decision, making sure that she knows about all three options, that she thoroughly knows what's out there for her as far as resources. And so, because we don't want a woman to make a decision without the information.
Sure.
And then beyond that, there's so much more that we do. If she chooses to parent, then we're able to connect her with the resources of the community of support. We have 13 churches right now in Jackson that offer Embrace Grace support groups, and Embrace Legacy, which is the men's group, because there's guys involved in this too. So we're able to connect her to a community of support. If she chooses to have an abortion, we have abortion recovery support. We don't want a woman to suffer from the grief and the guilt and the shame. We want her to know that that is a forgivable sin, that when Jesus died on the cross, he covered that sin as well. And then also we do adoption referrals. We refer to licensed adoption agencies for that. So we cover a lot of things at the CPC. That's a very long answer. So what we've been doing is not going to change. We're going to keep on doing what we do, and we're trying to expand our services, but that's what we do.
That's great. You go ahead.
Well, I have a question that as I was listening to you, one of the things that a lot of times happens when we start talking about the issue of abortion in churches and why people get them and that sort of thing, we make a lot of assumptions, I think, about the types of people that are going to have an abortion or why people get an abortion. In your experience, when you've worked with young women or women in general as they've considered abortion, what is kind of like the number one thing that you've noticed, like, this is why somebody comes in and considers this as an option?
Well, it's usually not just one thing. It's usually a combination of things. A lot of it is the relationships that they're in, the people who are influencing them. More women choose abortion because they feel pressured than not. And so they're feeling pressure from their boyfriend, from their parents, their employer, their teachers, all kinds of things. Just people, it's easier to tell someone to go have an abortion than to actually help them along, help them be successful. And so that's the easy way out, actually, for the community around her. And so a lot of times it's the relationships. Sometimes it is financial hardships. Sometimes it's just that it's not the time that she wanted to be pregnant. She's in the middle of school, she's about to graduate, or she just got a job, and being pregnant was not in her plan right now. Another thing that people don't realize that it comes up very, very often is just health issues. Women, a lot of our patients have already had children, or they've been pregnant before and they had a difficult pregnancy, or they have medical issues that make it very hard for them to be pregnant, or they're diabetic, or whatever, things that are risk factors, that are real risk factors for them in being pregnant, and they're scared, and they don't know that they're going to be able to do that. A lot of, like, I physically can't do this again, and that's something I never even thought about, just as a pro-life Christian in the church pew, never thought about, the medical things that, carrying a child is hard, and it's a lot on your body. And so even that, being able to reassure her and get her in front of medical professionals who can help her with that, so there's always a lot of things. It's never just the pregnancy, it's the situation around it. And another thing to know in the church is that we don't know exactly the numbers, but it's as many as 1 in 5 women in the church have had an abortion. So if you're thinking about it as like those people that have abortions, well, it's us. It's the church. We, women in our churches have had abortions, and so it's not another category of people. It's all of us. Yeah. It's not different in the church and outside the church.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I was thinking about that last thing that you said, a number as big as 1 in 5, that's a lot of people if you think about it. And as pro-life or people who believe in the sacredness of life, Christians, how do we do a better job of showing compassion to those that have had to make those decisions or felt like they needed to make those decisions, as we love them and interact with them? So
it's important the way we talk about abortion, first of all, that I hear a lot of time, well, I can't imagine doing that to my child. Well, that some people can't imagine that if they knew that, but if you can put yourself in the circumstances of you have no one around you to support you, the people around you are telling you this is the only thing, or that you already don't feel valued. There's so many women now, the way that we're raising our daughters is not valuing them for who they are, it's so we've got to teach people, if you don't believe you have value, then how are you going to value the life inside of you? And so as a church, we've got to do better at welcoming children when a woman has too many kids, or when the child has a disability, or when the pregnancy is before marriage. Not that we're not celebrating the sin.
That's right.
But we're valuing that life and making a way for that woman, even if the pregnancy is not in the order that we think it should be, or in this situation that it should be.
Yeah, something we spent some time talking about earlier is this idea of nuance in the way we approach people, because situations in life are way more complex than we like to think of them.
Right.
Like a lot of times we like to simplify everything and say, well, it's black and white. You should have done this and you've done this, and so really it's your fault, and now you're stuck with that decision.
Right.
Instead of, we can come alongside you and love you as you deal with this, and help you as you deal with this, and not, at the same time, not say, well, we're glad that you made this choice. We can still value life, and I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe it's our political culture, or maybe it's our society. We like to make everything really black and white and say you're either this or that, and there's no in between for people. There's no nuance for us to kind of work through. So I agree that it's a complicated issue, and one that needs some thought. So Matt, you got
what are some of your all's greatest needs right now as an organization, and as you continue to interact with women, and I would imagine even more so now, because if abortion is no longer an option in the state, depending on legislation and all those types of things, you're going to have a lot more women wanting to know what choices they do have, and kind of walk through some of that. And so I would imagine, as you said, it's only going to broaden, and so what are some of those, greatest needs that you guys see right now?
Sure. Well, the first thing is doing this right now, having the conversation about it. The church has got to talk about abortion. They've got to talk about difficult things and figure out how do we build a culture that supports life. The CPC can't do it all on our own. We've got to welcome people in and make a way for single moms and for women who are in difficult situations. And so just looking at the church first is saying, what are we doing? You know, how can we make sure that every mom is welcome here, and dads, single dads, let's not, they're out there, and we forget them a lot of times. So that's the first thing, is really having a conversation and getting educated about what that looks like to truly be pro life, not just pro birth, of course. At the CPC, we have doubled our budget. We have doubled our staff over the last year, knowing this is coming down the road, praying, anticipating, hoping that this is coming. We know we're able to intake more patients right now. We're growing our staff still. We do need volunteers. But we need people to have conversations, invite us in to speak to small groups in your church, and we need more support groups in churches. I think y'all have done Embrace Grace before at this church in a small group, to be able to welcome in moms and dads. Of course, we always need financial support. Our biggest thing right now is just technology. Like I said, we compete online with the abortion clinics through Google. Google is officially not friends with the pro-life movement. You know, they're not pro-life, and they have a lot of pressure from the abortion industry, not even to let us show up on Google. And so that's going to cost us more and more as we try to navigate what that looks like for us to even be in front of women. The other thing mostly is prayer. We need prayer right now, just for the days ahead. We've never been here before. We're in a new place, and so protection always. We've been fortunate; our staff has been safe, as pregnancy centers have been, bombed and vandalized and things like that. We've had security on site to help us. So, but just keep praying for us as well.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that some of the options that could be viable options for people trying to make a difficult choice, adoption, fostering, those sort of things. What would you say to a believer who is trying to, they want to wade into this, they want to try to find a way to be a source of help and support for these mothers that maybe don't want to keep the child but don't want to have an abortion. So as they are considering whether or not they should adopt, whether or not they should be a foster parent, what are some of the things that they should consider?
Well, honestly, there are more waiting families than there are children to be adopted. And so there are a lot of Christian, godly people who are willing to take in babies. And but there are not a lot of women who come through our office who would even consider placing for adoption, because it's a culture thing. They don't have a reference point. Most of the women that we see don't know another woman who's placed their child for adoption. A lot of them equate, and what we feel like is that they equate placing your child for adoption to the same as putting them in the foster system. It's a system that they're not familiar with, that doesn't feel safe, and it is safe. I'm not saying we're absolutely advocates for adoption, but that's a big hurdle for them to say, I'm going to do that. Also, they have to carry their child for 9 months, and at that point they bonded with the child, because that's what we're made to do. And so honestly, I don't know that more families lining up to adopt infants is really a need as much as fostering older children. I will say that. I mean, if you ask anyone in this space right now, being willing to foster older children, and knowing that that's going to be temporary. The plan is usually to reunite them with the families, and it is not easy. I'm a foster parent. It is not easy at all. It is not for the faint of heart. Your heart will be broken. The children are not coming to you saying, thank you so much for taking me into your home. That's not how it works. They've been hurt so many times that they're not going to bond easily. So it's not a feel good. It's doing what the Lord's called you to do, if the Lord's called you to do that, but it's not necessarily going to feel wonderful to do it every day. So my challenge is, if that's the route, if you're considering adoption, that really the need there is older children. It's not the infants. Now, for us, walking alongside the moms, if that's what you're feeling called to do, we need more women who can help, be mentors, who can really, really get in life with these moms and be an encouragement. With these Embrace Grace groups that we've started, we've been so impressed with just how how much these women want relationships, and we're so isolated now. They'll drive we've had women driving from Canton to Richland every week for a group just to have that connection. And they could meet a woman who's leading a support group, and just 1 or 2 weeks of going to the Bible study with them, and then they're reaching out for them just when they go through something difficult in their life. They're calling that woman that they just met because that woman is there for her. And so that's really the need. There's a lot of a need just for relationships and investing in relationships with these women and building that support system that they don't have. So I would say for us, that's the bigger need than adoptive families for babies right now.
Yeah. And so what does kind of a mentoring relationship look like if you have some women who want to come alongside these younger women, not necessarily younger, but these women who are facing these choices and walking through carrying a child and all those types of things? What does that kind of mentorship and walking and doing life together kind of look like?
We have a support services department that we have training for that, and so they can help set up training and set the boundaries for you. A lot of people are concerned that, if I take this woman on, then she's going to want me to pay her bills. I mean, and that's what people think happens, and that actually maybe sometimes, but most often it's not even financial. I mean, I know that's just what people think. I'm afraid to do that because I'm going to end up have another child all of a sudden, that I'm supporting. And really it's just checking in, being available. We've had so many stories of just women, having that, even if it's an older woman, they don't have to look the same as the mom, that they can just call and say, this difficult thing happened, and can we just talk about it? And you're the first person I thought of to call because you care. So it's just being available, having some kind of a regular time that you check in with them, but it's not taking on another dependent, that people might think it is. So.
Yeah, that's good.
So, you mentioned that the church needs to have these conversations. I decided, in God's providence, I really believe that this is the case. I was really struggling to come up with something to preach through the month of July. I was like, I had a plan early in the year, and I got closer and closer to this month, and I was like, this just doesn't feel like what I need to do. And then Rose overturned, and I was like, I need to talk about this with our church. And so for the next 4 weeks, I'm gonna preach through some texts that are very much, this is what it means to believe that life is sacred, and that this is what it means as believers to believe in the sanctity of life. So with that in mind, what is something that you think that a church needs to hear from the pulpit, from Scripture, from their Bible study leaders, their lay leaders? What do they need to hear about the sacredness of life? How if you could have somebody say one thing, what would it be? I mean, that's a big question. Maybe it's gonna be more than one thing. Okay, five's good. Five's great.
It does really start with value, like I said before. I mean, are we teaching our young people what love really looks like? Or when we start, I'll get on a soapbox. I'm gonna try not to, but our teenage girls and our daughters and our sons, are we teaching them about value and dignity? Are we teaching them about what a relationship looks like, where they're a daughter of the King, they're a child of God, and are we really teaching that? Are we really teaching dignity? And not that everybody has to be dressed like pilgrims, but I mean, are we really prioritizing your dignity and your value? And so the conversation has to start earlier, in the church, and really equipping parents to have those conversations with their children about sex and relationships. And you've got to decide before the pregnancy what you're going to do about the pregnancy. Not that you're saying everybody's going to sleep together. That's not what we're saying. Right. But you've got to know where we're going to stand if that happens, And so being able to have those conversations early in the church. Another thing I think about, so that was kind of one thing, is just value and worth with our children, starting that early. Another thing I keep thinking about is if I was labeled for the rest of my life for one of my for one of my past sins. I haven't experienced abortion, but I have definitely done some things that I don't really need to be labeled for me for the rest of my life in front of my church members, in front of the community. But that's who Jesus came for. Yeah. He came for people who have sinned, and the Bible's full of murderers and all these things we know. But we've got to come past abortion being the sin in the church that we can't talk about, and then the people who've done it, we just can't imagine that we would ever be that person. We can't label that. And honestly, you don't know. Most of us cannot. I can, because I've talked to women who've had abortions in their past, but you don't know. And there's a reason you don't know. It's because they're terrified of judgment, and they feel the guilt and shame of that. And I'm not saying we're celebrating abortion by any means, but we've got to be a place where women can feel like that is not something that is so completely different and so much worse than any other thing. And so how do we do that as a church? It's going to be hard. And then also, just like I said before, when a woman is facing a pregnancy that is outside of what we feel like is the right time. Or, because we're so quick to say, well, this baby gets a baby shower and this one doesn't, or this one gets a wedding shower and this one, things like that in our church that we've got to really think, well, how am I celebrating life? How am I honoring life and building a culture where women feel like they're not, because we forget that there's a man involved, but the women are the ones that show the pregnancy. And so really thinking through, am I welcoming this life? Am I being a place that where a woman in a difficult circumstance would feel welcome? So and I think that's all the way that Christians are supposed to be different from the world. And we're not, and Jesus was here for sinners. And so we keep remembering that he came for sinners, that would change the way we think about abortion and the way we talk about abortion.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that's all helpful. And I think it's those are all good places for us to think through big issues. We're going to actually, we talked about this the other day in our staff meeting. Those are a lot of those things are things that we're going to address as a church. So my last question for you is this: as a local church, there's two ways I want to look at this. How can individuals take some really practical steps toward helping kind of break cycles, support people, and then how can we as a local church right here begin to do things that are helpful to you guys?
So, first of all, I think that as an individual, you can definitely connect with us on our website, cpcmetrofriends.org.
Where are you guys located?
Yeah. So, one of our clinic is across the street from the abortion facility that will not be there much longer in Jackson. We're in Fondren on State Street. So, under the Cobb's Cleaners, that's across the street from the big hotel. That kind of is a reference point. We're 100 yards from the abortion clinic. And then our administrative office, where our call center, our support services, is over off I-55 North behind the Flag Store, by the Green Room, off of Bound Street.
If you live in our area, you know exactly where this is, because you've seen the Flag Store before.
That's right. So over there off 55.
Yeah. So visit the website.
Visit the website. There's a Get Involved button that you can fill out, just a preliminary volunteer application, and then we'll get you started. We have been overwhelmed with volunteer applications this week. We've never seen anything like it. So that's really exciting. And there are lots of different ways that you can get plugged in with us. And so we'll just we're probably going to be backed up for a little bit, but just know if you filled out the form, we'll contact you. But we can try to get you involved and find out what's the best way for you to plug in with us. And then as a church, there's ways that their church can be involved. Of course, our Life Walk. I know y'all participated in that. That's our big church event. That's where every church in Jackson that supports life brings a team. And we had over 700 walkers this year, which is amazing. And that's like just a visible sign to the community. This is the support this is what's available for women. This is what representative of the community that supports life. And so, and just being a place where we know that we can send women, that whether it's for, an Embrace Grace or single mom, that they'll be welcome. Just starting that relationship. We have a relationship with y'all, and we've been connected with y'all for a long time. So, but being vocal about, you don't have to be political, but being vocal about that we support life, and just finding ways that fit in with your mission and your community that you can support life. Did I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's very helpful.
Yeah, that's good. And one more time, the website
is cpcmetrofriends.org.
cpcmetrofriends.org. And so as you've listened to the podcast or watched the podcast, we encourage you to visit that website, and connect with them to see how you can get involved. Again, just thank you so much for being a part. And again, this is Erin Kate Good, who is the executive director for Center for Pregnancy Choices here in Jackson Metro area. And so as you listen to the podcast, if you have additional questions, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach out to CPC. If you know someone who is in need of help, again, you've got that website, you got the opportunity to connect there with them. And as always, we want to just continue this conversation going. And so if you think of other questions, concerns, things that, maybe we didn't talk about in this podcast, don't hesitate to reach out to us so we can keep this conversation going. But as always, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.